Good morning. It's Friday morning here in Edmonton, and I hope that you have a good weekend planned. I promised you a short video about publishing in LIS, and so here it is. I want to talk just generally about publishing, about implementing research, and then talk about some specific publications that are common in LIS research, and just about the publication process itself. Publishing is not necessarily part of everyone's workload that works in a library, and most certainly is not usually expected or part of a workload of anyone who is not a librarian. And funding, time to research, time to do the publications is not often supported in many different types of libraries, as you're probably aware. Academic librarians more and more are becoming part of the faculty collective agreement in institutions, which often means that there is a requirement for scholarly output as part of their workload. And if that's the case, then there is an expectation from the institution that they will do some original research and publishing every year. So you will find much of the literature is written either by academic or librarians in academic institutions, or faculty that are at library schools, particularly in North America. There are venues for publishing research outside of just original research, and that is typically what you see with public librarians or even school librarians or teacher librarians. So we want to look to the breadth of journals that exist that will accept publications that move beyond an original research publication. And I'll show you a couple of those that are Canadian in focus. In fact, there really is only two main peer-reviewed Canadian publications within LIS. Publishing in general, though, two key things to keep in mind as not barriers, but aspects of publishing that need to be considered. One of them being ethics, because ethics will frame what one does in a study and what one is able to do in a study. You'll always have to get ethics approval in order to conduct any research, and that will frame and constrain what you do. The second big piece is budget. If you are funded or you're trying to get funding, the budget will definitely limit what you can and cannot do, for sure. So in terms of getting funding, sometimes when you're in an academic environment, you have access to the fairly big funding models, such as the SSHRC grant, Social Sciences and Humanities Research grant that's in Canada anyway. And sometimes there's funding that is institution specific, or it could be even taken out of your professional development money that is allotted to you. There are government programs and grants both at the federal and provincial level if you are publishing in Canada. And I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with what the models are in the United States, but you'll find similar models there. What the budget is often used for is for support for conducting your research. So the time spent has to be approved by your institution or by your manager that you can spend the time conducting the research, but then the funding will pay for that support to conduct the research. So for example, hiring a research assistant to help with things like data collection. Sometimes they can help with the literature review and even the writing of the literature review. We hired one MLIS student a couple of years ago to help with an environmental scan that we did in Canada, and that research assistant worked with NVivo actually and did a fair bit of the coding for us, because the coding wasn't so much to theme, but data specific information from different library schools across Canada that she coded and then put in various categories. So it wasn't something that where her sort of creative, it wasn't necessarily a creative endeavor on her part as much as an organization tool. But it was very helpful to have that. We also had another research assistant for our current study that did organization. She did all the finding of the literature and then organized it into folders for us so that we could see, so that we could see the breadth of literature, and we could write our literature review based on what she discovered. You could have budget that is used for transcription services if the research assistant isn't doing the transcription, for data processing materials like audio recorders and videos, for survey administration tools such as SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey has a free subscription, but it's very limited. In fact, you can only design 10 questions for free. So if your study, most original research studies will be broader than that, you'll have to pay for a yearly subscription for SurveyMonkey. And it could pay as well for analysis tools like NVivo, which sometimes an institution will have a subscription to it, but a lot of times they won't, so you'll have to build that into your budget. Travel is another budget line to consider, either to collect the data or to disseminate the research findings. For going to conferences, doing the presentations at conferences. In my institution, for example, funding to go to a conference to attend is covered through professional development money, but if I present, then research money can be used for that because I am actually producing a scholarly output then. Sometimes a good way to get started with research is with poster presentations, and that might be something you've already had experience with. You can conduct some original research or a study, or do a literature review or a scan of a particular aspect of library work or the environment, and then present that in a poster. So you don't have to publish a full research paper or seek out a research publication, but the poster can disseminate your work and make it more broadly known, the work that you've been doing, and is relatively inexpensive to produce. In terms of journal publications, open access is big in the field of LIS right now, as you can imagine, and as I'm sure that you realize. Most of the studies point towards the fact that open access publications, open access articles do get read more than those that are behind a paywall. With peer review publications, as you know, academic articles go through a peer review process. What is considered to be the gold standard is double blind, which is where the authors do not know who is reviewing, and the reviewers also do not know who the authors are. The publications within Canada that I'll talk to you about are both double blind peer reviewed publications. Single blind means simply that the authors do not know who the peer reviewers are. Dr. Michael McNally, I got some of this background information from his video lecture that he did in the winter term. And what he said in that lecture is the last 10 years, there is a trend towards more open reviews where both parties know who is writing and who is making the comments. My feelings on that are a bit mixed. I can see the value in having sort of an open dialogue, but also because the LIS field is so small, there is so much opportunity for bias, and you can't sort of help that jump into your mind if you're a peer reviewer, and also could intimidate you as a writer if you're writing in a publication where you know who the editors are. And there can be some, I would suppose that there can be some accusations about favoritism too if you're accepting publications from somebody within the same institution as you are. But I guess that is more of a trend in peer-reviewed literature altogether. Submitting to a peer-reviewed publication can be quite a challenging process. You write an article and it doesn't hardly ever just get accepted just like that. Carte blanche, everything's great. More often than not, you submit the publication, it either will get rejected outright, it will get rejected with it'll get accepted but with major revisions, where they might want you to rewrite an entire piece of it. Or it could get accepted, but with minor revisions, and that's probably the most common if you've been a good researcher. So you can expect the whole process of doing submitting to a peer review publication to be quite lengthy, even up to a year. You'll finish your study, and then you'll submit your publication to, or you'll submit your research to a publication. It'll take some time for it to go through the peer review process, and with the feedback come back to you. And as it goes back and forth between you and the copy editors. And sometimes the comments can be really lengthy and really detailed. Other times they can be really basic and broad. But you have to take all of the comments and suggestions and criticisms as something that will strengthen your work, that will strengthen your paper. And that was certainly has been my experience. It is a very long process, and there are some publications, though, that do not take that long and do not require a peer-reviewed process. I'll mention those just in a second. I first want to just mention, remember that local conferences as well, sometimes they are paper conferences where you can submit a paper, and then you can submit a paper into the proceedings of the conference proceedings, and then you can go and present as well, and you can get funding to do that. And just before I mention a couple of the Canadian publications, I also want to mention outside of conference publications or conference presentations, there's also, and posters, there's also self-publishing that you can do as well, or in local geographic publications, in trade publications, or in toolkits. That's becoming quite common, at least in Canada. Toolkits that consortia often will create, which is a depository for people to submit their research or to submit their studies that they've conducted at their local institution, and they wish to share what those discoveries are. So there's different ways to publish outside of what we might define as traditional peer-reviewed publications. Research in the public library side is a little bit more challenging, I think, just because you don't often have time designated in your workload to work on publications. It's a very, practice-based profession. And, ironically, it's one of the areas that maybe requires the most research, and where when you work in a public library, you've got the greatest insight. And, might produce really good research, but, just to have the time to do it. So you may want to focus more on that action-based research or practical research, rather than conducting an entire, methodological study. It's not surprising, though, that surveys tend to dominate in the public library world, just because the things that are being studied are more contextual, they're problem-based. Things like needs assessments and developing benchmarks, evaluating library programs, things that have an output that is desired or an output that's needed, action-based in that sense. Now, as far as the publications go in Canada, there's two main publications, one being the Partnership, which is the Canadian Journal of Library and Information Practice and Research. This is hosted by the Partnership, which is I guess you could call it sort of a consortia of the library associations across Canada, the different provincial associations, and they group together and do a number of different valuable things for the library industry across Canada, of any type of library. One of them being the publication of the Partnership Journal. This Partnership Journal is hosted, or the back end technical end of it is hosted by Guelph University, and the editors are from all across Canada. But I do find, when I look at the list of the editorial board and people involved, it does tend to be a little bit Ontario heavy, or sort of more Eastern Canada heavy. So I would like to see more publications and more participation in the editorial side coming from the West, but that's just my thing. The partnership recently restructured their publications so that it's not just all peer-reviewed publications. They have a section that's called Theory and Research, and Theory and Research is original research that's been conducted. Innovations in Practice and Features is a bit more of a trade publication flavor to it, where people that are in the industry will share their practices and maybe things they've implemented, things they've done, things they've changed, and what the result of that has been, and then sharing that. Features is very similar to that, but it can also feature a conference presentation, new insight into an idea or topic. It doesn't even have to be surrounding a research study that's been done. And then they also have book reviews. It's quite wide-ranging in that sense and quite accessible for any type of publication that you might be interested in. If I just go to the About section, it does provide a little bit more detail about what these different categories allow. So you can see the features provides open, inclusive, and informal space for authors to share ideas. And so you can see it includes professional development, best practices, profiles of practitioners in the field, case studies, that sort of thing. So there are different avenues for doing research in the field that might be more accessible in your situation. And then the Innovations in Practice describes and evaluates new library initiatives. It does go through the double-blind peer-reviewed process, so it's a little bit more robust, but is more specific to what's new in the field, whereas Theory and Research is just more all-encompassing about anything about the library industry and theoretical practice. So the partnership is great. Their process of submitting and receiving feedback is really well designed, and it's been around for quite a while, so it's a well-respected publication. The second major publication is hosted by the University of Toronto Press, and it's called the Canadian Journal of Information and Library Science. Both of these, I'm going to step back. The partnership is an open access publication, so as soon as it's published, then we get notice of it and we're able to access it. The Canadian Journal of Information and Library Science, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see it as being an open access publication. It has an embargo period attached to it. And so the only access is through a paywall, such as a library database. But the publications are very substantial, robust, and it is also a great place to go for publishing original research. When I went to the University of Library site and did a search to find out where it's indexed in, so I can just put into Canadian Journal of Library and Information Science, that's it, right? Information and Library Science. Their names are too similar. And then do a search of the e-journals. It is obviously available electronically, and you can see Academic Search Complete. Of course, the Library and Information Science Source, which is our largest database for library literature, includes it. Project Muse and Education Resource. If I go into Academic Search, what you can do is go into the publication and just have a look at the current issue and see what kind of publications they include. And then you get a sense of the breadth of and the types of publications that might be accepted. When I went through this list and looked at authors, a number of them were from library schools. So you see a lot of research published by professors. It would be great to see more practitioners involved, but I don't know how realistic that is. So, and let me see here. These are just a couple of the articles that I brought up just to show you who is publishing in these fields. You can see that some of them are from outside of Canada as well. So it's not Canadian-centric in that sense. It is an international publication that will accept authors from outside of Canada, obviously, and with context outside of Canada as well, which is great. Also be aware that the American Library Association has a great resource called LARCS that talks about where you can disseminate your research in various areas. So it has a tab for present and publish your research. It talks about the various conferences that are in the United States primarily for disseminating your research. But then they also have a list of what they call selected journals. So it's not comprehensive. I didn't see the Canadian journals in here, but they break it down by more subtopics. So if your topic is in, say, reference services, there is a publication specifically on reference that is peer-reviewed. And they have research methods, place, research tools, grant resources if you're in the United States. But you know, there really is no border when it comes to publishing in North America. And as you know, our attendance at conferences, we tend to go back and forth. Maybe not as much in the last few years because even some institutions have placed restrictions on traveling to the United States. But largely, we participate without there being a real defined line between Canadian and American research. All right, I think that is all I wanted to share with you today. I hope that told you something that you didn't know already about publishing. It is something that if it's something that you enjoy doing, you enjoy writing, you enjoy the research process, if you've enjoyed this course, I hope it's something that becomes part of your professional career as you move on. And I have a bit of a bias because I teach in a library technician program, but I would certainly like to see more paraprofessionals publishing as well and being involved in the research, even co-publishing or co-authoring with librarians or managers. That's one area that if I get into a position of an editor of a publication, I would love to see more acceptance, I think, and just more attention paid in different libraries so that librarians and non-librarians can devote some time to research, because I think that it's what is going to move our profession forward. And frankly, I don't think that it should be just professors in library schools who are doing the research. I think that people who are in the field, who are grassroots at the ground level, should be publishing. And I just realized my recording probably cut off maybe part of me for some of the recording. So I apologize for that. But anyway, doesn't matter. Hopefully you got what you needed out of this, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks so much for listening.